Hi everyone, I'm Barrett Ristroff, a lawyer, planner, and researcher working on climate change adaptation with tribes and rural communities. In this video, I'm going to show you a method for evaluating policy and project ideas. The example I'm going to show you is in the arena of hazard mitigation, specifically reducing the risk of flooding impacts. But you really could apply it to any community decision or even a personal decision. The video is in connection with the Resilient Rural America Project's second training module. If you found this video on YouTube, I encourage you to go to the project website shown on this screen and check out the whole training. While you're watching this video or afterwards, you can access the spreadsheet that I used to do this evaluation. The address is above. You can download it as an Excel spreadsheet and then redo it with your own information and considerations. I'll backtrack for a minute to ask, why do we need a complicated spreadsheet to make a decision? Well, you may not. If you just have a few options and a few considerations, it may be an easy decision. But if you're working through Resilient Rural America Project Module 2, and you're starting to feel overwhelmed with all the flood mitigation options and information out there, then you might just want a method to put some order to it. The other reason to use a spreadsheet is that you may be making a decision based on many criteria. For example, you might not be picking an option just because it's the cheapest. You probably have to take into account other considerations, such as public opinion. Some criteria might be set by law. For example, a grant may require your project to have a certain ratio of benefits to costs. Also, some criteria might be more important than others. For example, cost might be twice as important as staff expertise if it's relatively cheap to hire an expert to help with the project. In that case, you might want to have cost count for twice as much as staff expertise, and you can do this when you use a spreadsheet. So the first thing I'm going to do is write in each option as a row. Just to backtrack a minute, you might be asking, where did I get these options from? Well, for this video, the options are just imaginary, things I made up based on the universe of options for reducing flood risk. In an actual community, you'd probably have had a public meeting or a survey to generate some options, probably hear from the public about what they're interested in doing. And then the local government, probably the planning or zoning commission of the local government, is tasked with picking out the potential options to proceed with. If you're working on a hazard mitigation plan and considering flood mitigation as part of the plan, you probably have had a hazard mitigation planning committee that picked out these options and will do the work of evaluating them. So I'm just writing in these imaginary options in my spreadsheet, starting with joining the National Flood Insurance Program Community Rating System. That's the program that helps the community get discounts on flood insurance. I also have a row for adopting a new ordinance or adjusting your existing ordinance to limit new development in floodplains and or require that new development be elevated or constructed in such a way to reduce flood risk. Another option I have here relates to the stormwater management system. If your precipitation projections are suggesting that there'll be more rainfall in the future, you may have to do some capital improvements on the community sewer system to increase its capacity to hold stormwater. Then I have an example of green infrastructure, installing permeable pavement in municipal parking areas. Permeable pavement doesn't work everywhere, and it would be hard to require its use throughout the whole community, but for new construction or perhaps existing areas, it may make sense to install it. Sometimes flooding relates to blocked drainage in the community. There may be downed trees or trash or debris in a canal. So I have here the idea of cleaning trash and debris out of a local canal. Then I have an option for existing infrastructure, and really those are two different options, elevating or removing flood-prone buildings out of a floodplain. This can be a sensitive and expensive option, but it's something that the Federal Emergency Management Agency is willing to fund. The final option I have here is restoring a damaged landscape that could provide drainage. This might be a wetland area that got paved before but is no longer being used and can be returned to its original ecosystem function. All of these hypothetical options are somewhat general, which is fine for our exercise. But if you're really going to be able to calculate cost and the benefits to cost ratio, you need to be much more specific. For example, you'd need to figure out which particular buildings would be included in a buyout and the value of these buildings. But for this general evaluation, at least we're narrowing down the options, and this level of specificity is okay. The next thing to be done is figure out what criteria you want to use to evaluate these options. I mentioned before that the community is probably going to have some sort of planning committee that would be tasked with this. For the sake of this video, I'm throwing out some example criteria, but you might just use a few of these criteria, or you might think of others not included here. In this example, I have 8 criteria listed in no particular order, 1 in each column. It's also worth noting that there's some overlap between these criteria. The first is cost, specifically the cost to the local government or whatever entity is paying for the project. Next is benefit to cost ratio. This concept will be explained more in another lesson for this module, but to give you the gist of it, if you're not familiar, the factor is about the bang for your buck. For example, if the local government gets $4 of flood mitigation benefit for every dollar it spends, then the benefit to cost ratio is 4 to 1. Next, I have technical feasibility, which gets at how complicated the project is. This might overlap with the criteria for cost or time. Next is staff capacity or experience, which considers the degree to which the current staff could carry out the project, or whether they would need outside help. Next, I have community support, which you might determine based on a survey or a public meeting. Next, since so many projects do need outside help and grants, I include a criterion for how easy it is to get grants. I realize that this overlaps with cost to some degree. I include it because some kinds of grants may be non-competitive and easy to get, whereas others might be very competitive and require hiring a skilled grant writer. The next criterion is whether you have partners available to help carry out the project. Again, this overlaps with cost and perhaps community support. Having partners can really help you get a project going and finish it. Next, I have the consideration of whether a project is already ongoing. This can make it easier to get funding to go further with the project and easier to get community support. The final criterion I have here for purposes of this example is lack of harmful environmental impacts. There may be projects which reduce a risk like flooding but have negative impacts, maybe because they require construction on a sensitive habitat area, or maybe they're going to generate a lot of waste. On the other hand, some projects may have beneficial impacts on the environment, like the example of restoring habitat. The next step is to figure out if there are any criteria that are so important that you want to assign them a weight. So projects that do well in this criterion will score better overall. For example, it may be that you're a small community without a grant writer and you want projects the staff can mostly do by themselves without having to rely on grants. In that case, staff capacity and partners might be more important than how easy it is to get a grant. I imagine that for most communities, cost is going to be a factor that's much more important than the others. So you could assign cost a higher weight than other criteria. One thing to keep in mind, at least for this example, is that there's some overlap between the government cost criterion and other criteria, like the ease to get grants. So it may not be necessary to assign a weight to cost. For purposes of this example, let's imagine that community support or public acceptance is extremely important, and we consider it to be twice as important as all other considerations. This means we're going to assign it a weight of 2 and give everything else a 1. We'll put these weights in the second row with the weight for each criterion just beneath the cell containing that criterion. And you can see that there's a 2 right under community support here. Now we're going to score each option on a scale of 0 to 10, with 10 being the best and 0 meaning the option does not satisfy the criterion at all. To make it easier to see, I split up the spreadsheet into 2 pieces. You can see that I slightly changed the name of the first criterion. I now call it cheapness because I want to be ranking all the criteria in the same way. If an option is extremely cheap or free, it could get a 10. For example, I'm somewhat arbitrarily assigning these scores because I don't have a specific community and specific options to consider. I'm imagining that the community rating system is going to be an 8 in terms of cost or cheapness, a 6 in terms of benefit to cost ratio, 6 for technical feasibility, and 2 for staff experience because they may have no familiarity with the program or just a little bit of familiarity. Going to the rest of the criteria, I give the community rating system a 3 in terms of public support because it's going to require a zoning ordinance that some people may not like. Note that I don't have to change this score to account for the fact that I gave community support a higher weight as an evaluation criterion. My spreadsheet is going to do that automatically later on. I give this option a 4 in terms of grants, since I'm not sure if there are any relevant grants. I give it a 4 in terms of partners, since I can think of a couple potential partners, but I'm not sure about them. I give it a 0 in terms of already ongoing, because it would be brand new and the community is not familiar with it. Finally, I give it a 10 in terms of harmful environmental impacts, since I don't believe there will be any. At this point, let's imagine that our planning committee has gone through every option and assigned a score for each criterion. I have a table that looks like this. Now I need to figure out how to tally everything up and come up with one score for each option. The spreadsheet that you can access for this video already has a formula in each cell for the final column. The formula does not just add up each number in the row. It multiplies each number by any weight that was assigned to each criterion. Remember that the weights are all in row 2. So you're always going to be multiplying the numbers in each option row by the weight numbers in row 2. This is just another way of visualizing how the row is added up. You can see the formula in the cell and in the larger font below. At this point, you should have a final score for each option. Here in this hypothetical example, it looks like cleaning trash and debris out of a local canal scores the highest at 65, and permeable pavement is the lowest at 39. Sometimes the scores may surprise you and make you reconsider the weights or go back and give something a second look. You should always keep in mind that this effort to put a number value on each option is far from perfect. We're missing a lot of information we may need to assign the option a more accurate score. For that reason, you may want to take the top few contenders rather than just number 1 and put them out to a vote, either a public vote or a vote by the local government or planning commission. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you'll continue with the rest of the Resilient Rural America Project Module 2 course and get in touch with me through the Model Forest Policy Program if you have any questions.